Hi, and welcome to the Storytelling on Kickstarter webinar. This is the webinar replay. We have re-recorded this initial part of the webinar because we had some technical glitches, and the first 15 minutes or so were not actually recorded. We will have the full discussion between me and the panelists from the original webinar. Luckily, all of that content has been recovered, and we will follow right after we go through these initial setup slides that just give a little bit of context around why storytelling is so important. So let me just dive right in. I'm going to screen share, so let me get that started. And all right, now here we go. So, thank you for joining us today for the Storytelling on Kickstarter webinar. If you are looking for tips from experienced creators about how they go about building stories, compelling stories to get people to support their projects on Kickstarter, to support their product launches on Kickstarter, you are in the right place. So we're going to cover a lot of content today, and here's a few tips to help you get the most value from the time we're going to have together. First off, as much as possible, try to reduce distractions and so that you can really focus in on what we're sharing with you. Next up, stay until the end. You're actually in luck being a viewer of the replay in that you can go back and forward so that if there's something that really interests you, you can kind of rewind, but also if there's some content that you were covering that you feel something you already are very familiar with, you can also fast forward. But really check the entire length of the webinar, because you just never know where you might be able to find some nuggets of wisdom that could have an impact on your own, on your own project. Be an active participant. This is a replay, but there's two ways that you can be an active participant in this webinar. First off, if you have any questions, make sure to leave them here in the comments section down below, because we will be checking the comments and we will be providing answers to anyone who has questions related to the content that we cover. And secondly, actively take notes about the material that we cover, since that will make it easier for you to refer to that. And that also just helps you retain those tips and knowledge for application later. There was a Q&A near the end of the event, which of course, as a replay attendee, you will not be able to take advantage of, but you will get the benefits of some of that since we have included the Q&A portion in this replay. And we do also share some more information about Launch Studio at the end of the webinar. This is not included in the replay, but what you can do if you want to get more details about Launch Studio, just go to launchstudio.com. So my name is Giulio Terra, and I am one of the founders of Launch Studio. And a little bit about my background: before starting Launch Studio, I actually worked at Kickstarter for a good 5.5 years. A big part of that running the design and technology community team, the team that's responsible for engaging with creators from the design and technology communities, and both getting them to come to Kickstarter to launch their products, but also helping them succeed, building out different tools and tool sets to help creators do as best as possible on our platform, or on Kickstarter's platform, no longer our platform. So really quick rundown of how we're going to go through, how we're going to spend the next hour together. First off, I'm going to give some quick intros of the panelists. Then I'm going to dive into a few points about why storytelling is so important on Kickstarter. Next up, I'll share some common myths and do my best to debunk those myths. Then we'll dive into the creator panel, which is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. And finally, we have a session where we provide more info about Launch Studio. But as I mentioned previously, for this replay, that section will not be included. So let me introduce our panelists. So first off, I'm really thrilled to have Erica Rosen, who is the VP of Marketing at Biolite. And Biolite is a really amazing company that they are dedicated to empowering people and protecting the planet by providing safe, reliable access to clean energy. And they have a program that both involves getting this type of clean energy products in the hands of people who live in countries like the US, but also in developing countries, into the hands of developing communities that need access to energy and access to light. And Erica's team at Biolite, they are responsible for managing all their brand building, content communications, and go-to-market programs. And under her stewardship, the team at Biolite has launched 4 highly successful and highly innovative products on Kickstarter, raising many millions of dollars through these launches. Next up, we have Oscar Lhermitte. Oscar is the co-founder of Sidekick. Sidekick is a studio that helps creators build narratives, stories to tell on Kickstarter. So they work with Kickstarter creators to develop videos, develop the project page, develop a story to come to life across both of those assets. And through Sidekick, Oscar has worked with over 20 Kickstarter creators, mostly in the design and technology categories, but also some in publishing and a few other categories. Through his own studio, Oscar has also launched 6 of his own projects through or products through crowdfunding. And Oscar is one of the core contributors on our Kickstarter masterclass. So I know there's a lot of our students attended the webinar, and they are very familiar with Oscar's work as an educator as well. And even from an educator perspective, Oscar has also been a tutor at the Royal College of Arts in London. So last but definitely not least, we have Taylor Levy, who is an artist and a designer. Taylor's work as an artist explores taking things apart and then getting an understanding of how they work and then putting them back together in a way that really exposes some of those inner workings. But that's from an artist perspective, that's what Taylor explores. But from a design perspective, Taylor is actually one half of a really amazing design studio based here in Brooklyn, New York. And they make these, just really beautiful and meticulously designed and engineered products that range from like very utilitarian products, like a beautifully crafted titanium utility knife, to these other products that are really on the border of the intersection of art and design. And to date, CW&T has brought to life 12 products on Kickstarter. So they have a lot of experience launching products on the platform. All right, so now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to tell you why storytelling matters so much on Kickstarter. And so, in general, storytellings are a really, really powerful tool for bringing, things to life, for communicating with people. One of the reasons why is because they help you connect with people on both a rational as well as an emotional level. And this is really crucial when you're trying to persuade people to take action. On Kickstarter, there are some special challenges that you need to overcome, and that storytelling is the only way for you to overcome these challenges. And there are 3 specific that I have in mind. And over the next few slides, I'm gonna dive into each of these 3 challenges. So first and foremost, people can't try your product. The reality is when you're buying a product, you're used to being able to actually go somewhere and look at that product, hold it, try it, before you actually make that purchase. And in those moments where you're not able to do that, you're also able to actually get a good sense how a product is produced and how it works by seeing other people who are using that product. You see it on the street, you see it in other people's hands. And again, so that's another way that, even if you're not able to personally try it, you're able to kind of try it or at least have a better sense of the product by experiencing it in a secondhand manner. Thirdly, even for the situations where you're just buying something online, you've never seen it, you're not able to see it through your day-to-day life, that the reality is most products then, when you're buying them on an e-commerce website, those products, you're actually buying it by being able to look at pictures or videos of the actual product that was produced, the mass-produced version of that product, and that's something that, again, when you're on Kickstarter, you're usually just seeing a prototype of a product that will eventually be mass-produced. So on Kickstarter, your product, people's experience of your product will be fully based on the story that you're telling about them, and that story is going to be built most likely using a prototype of your product. So, unlike these other means of selling your product, of getting your product out in the world, the fact that people can't try your product is a really important obstacle that you need to be able to surpass with your story. The next thing is that, you know, when you are buying a product, usually your friends can vouch for that product. You know, usually, you know, somebody who owns that product, and, you know, even if that person hasn't explicitly recommended that product to you, just by being able to look at how they use it and how they engage with it, you can get a sense, and potentially even rather than explicit, an implicit, you know, recommendation that that product meets a certain need. On Kickstarter, you know, this kind of social proof is really limited because you don't have your product in the hands of, you know, many people, and even trying to get press on Kickstarter becomes tougher because, you know, your prototype might not be as flawless as you like, so you might not be able to blow away somebody in the press with this product that you've created, since you may only have a prototype that is, you know, not 100% functional or doesn't look as good as the final product will be. And also, you just may not be able to get it into the hands of press because you may only have one prototype. But, you know, again, so you need to find a way to provide the social proof that is so easy to provide in other means of getting a product out there. And then the third challenge that you're going to have to deal with is that, you know, people don't know you, and getting people to give you money for a product that you've never tried, for a product they've never tried months before it ships, requires a good amount of trust. And, you know, this is a level of trust that's not required for most transactions that people have to carry out online nowadays. So what that means is your story on Kickstarter needs to build that credibility, establish that foundation of trust that will enable people to take action and actually feel confident in backing your product. And that means, you know, that might mean like this project featured in the slide here is a project from CW&T where their video actually shows them walking through the process for producing that product, you know, and that's a way to give people, you know, just confidence that you know what it takes to manufacture, and you're showing them exactly how it's going to be manufactured. Other storytelling techniques that people use is sometimes they actually share about the hard journey and all the hard problems that you've already solved, you know, that will enable you to bring that product to life, or even talking about your team and their experience and showing how your team has the experience required to bring that product to life. All right, so one way that I like to encapsulate all these factors is that on Kickstarter, your product is your story. People are going to experience your product only through your story. And so it's really, really important that you keep that in mind, and that you make sure that you put the attention to detail, the same level of attention to detail to your story as you are doing to crafting your product. Okay, now let's talk about some common myths that people have in mind. These are like erroneous assumptions that a lot of creators have when they think about storytelling on Kickstarter. The first and probably the most common one is that you need a super slick video to succeed on Kickstarter. And there's a reason why this myth exists. It's because, you know, the products that most people know from Kickstarter are these blockbuster products. And the reality is most blockbuster campaigns that have raised many millions of dollars do have slick videos because they did have big budgets to produce those videos. But it's important to consider that your video, the most important thing is that it is authentic to your brand and to who you are and to what you're trying to create. And so if that brand, if you are somebody who's trying to raise like millions of dollars with a really complex gadget, you know, then chances are you might need a slick video. But, you know, if you are, you know, an independent designer like CW&T making really beautiful products, then your video does need to have a sense, like a feel of being well produced, but it shouldn't feel overly slick. It should feel authentic to your brand. And this is, again, I bring CW&T as an example here because they do a great job at this, but I think any of the creators that are featured in the panel do a great job at this. Biolite does a great job at this, but they have, of course, you know, bigger budgets and a bigger ambition. And, you know, they actually have a company with a pretty, you know, strong brand identity that their videos need to align to and so forth. So, you know, just rather than think about this needs to be slick, think about, you know, what skill you're trying to get to with your product, with your project, and what your brand feels like, what is authentic to you, to your company. And that's really should be the driving force of what your video and what your entire project page should aspire to look like. The next challenge that the next misconception that we hear a lot is, creators think that, they can build their project page really fast. I've talked to many creators who tell me, you know what, I'm 3 weeks away from launch. And then when I ask them, how far along are you building out your story, building out your project page, they tell me that they haven't started. The reality is building out a solid, high quality project page and project video takes months, not weeks. And, just to write solid copy, to build the structure of a solid story, and then to produce a compelling video and well-taken photos just takes a lot of time. So it's really important, again, think about this timeline in terms of months rather than weeks. The last misconception that I want to touch on is that, some people think that Kickstarter pages should feel like e-commerce. And, they really are fans of how products look on the Apple website, on their eShop. And the reality is, your company is not Apple and Kickstarter is not Amazon. And, as I brought up in the previous sections where I talked about why storytelling is so important, backing a product, a creator, a project on Kickstarter is very different than buying something on e-commerce. And just two of the key kind of differences that I think you can threads that you can pull from the previous section of this presentation is that, when you're talking about what needs to be included in a narrative in an e-commerce website, it's really, you can be pretty product focused. Of course, it can help also to build that emotional connection, but you can be quite product focused. Whereas on Kickstarter, you also need to tell that more expansive story that's going to build that trust that your team actually is able to deliver on that promise. And that emotional connection is even more important because you're asking people to do something a little bit out of the ordinary. You're asking them to believe in you, to take a risk with you. And the other thing is, like on an e-commerce, you are actually trying to motivate people to enter into a very transactional, to have a very transactional mode of interaction with you. They're going to give you money. They're going to get a product in a few days, a few weeks at most. Whereas with Kickstarter, this is, they're entering into a much longer relationship with you because they're going to pledge money to you now, and they might only get their products, a few months, possibly even over a year later. Okay, so that is pretty much the setup that I wanted to do. Now, I'm going to invite Erica, Taylor, and Oscar to unmute so that we can start our little conversation. Before now I dive in and start kind of going through the questions, I did want to just, have one other poll that I wanted to run quickly, which, I won't wait till the poll is run to proceed, but I just want to get a sense of what's the level of confidence that people have in their storytelling skills? Like what level of skills do you have around, and comfort level do you have around storytelling? So if people want to answer that as we start this conversation, that would be really, really helpful. So where I want to start this conversation is really talking about how does your audience, what role does your audience play in the development of your story? How do you consider your audience? How do you think about your audience when you're thinking about developing a story? And how is that, just thinking about that inception of the story, you're just getting started. And Eric, I would love to start with you on this, just because I know some of the work that you've done in this area that I found very compelling, or some of the outcomes of the work that you've done in this area I found to be very compelling.
Sure, yeah. So trying to figure out the best place to start in that question. So Biolite, as we said, just to reiterate, our mission is to empower people and protect the planet through access to renewable energy. And the way that that manifests is in everyday objects. So most notably for the outdoors. So looking at lanterns, stoves, lights, solar panels. And for us, we believe that there's an opportunity to transition people into a renewable energy future through reliable, delightful interactions with everyday products. If you have a successful interaction with our gear, our intent is that it makes you not just believe in Biolite, but believe in the future of renewable energy. The reason I start there is that's sort of the meta story that needs to flow through every product story we tell. And so what we do is we think about the user experience. So we do, user-centered design, and we really focus around problem solving. So, the world doesn't need another headlamp. The world doesn't need another fire pit. The world doesn't need another solar panel, or does it? You know, and what's our permission to enter into the marketplace, enter into the customer's mind? And so for Biolite, we believe that having this really user-centered approach, we can design from first principles and solve problems in the user experience that other products aren't solving. And so for example, you know, the example that you've been giving in the slides is our headlamp. So I'm sure everybody here has seen a headlamp and has interacted with a headlamp. There is not a dearth of headlamp options out in the world. However, when we were doing user testing and qualitative interviews and really understanding what the current experience is, we uncovered a pretty significant design problem, which is that most headlamps use this kind of antiquated cantilever approach where you basically end up with like a doorknob sticking off your head. And so for us, we felt like we really landed on a design and user insight that really gave us permission to enter into this space and tell a really compelling story about why this product was going to change the way that you experienced a typical headlamp interaction.
Awesome. And just, I would love to, Taylor, I mean, I think Erica's, it seems like the consideration of audience goes through from your design process to your storytelling. It's kind of like this thread that goes through as you guys are figuring out what to make. And then once you figure that out, it of course informs how do you get it out there into the world. And Taylor, I know that you know, I think from my read, you know, I think the work that you do at CW&T is like a lot of things that you and Sewe are really passionate about. Are things that like personal explorations that really interest the two of you that end up becoming into products. I don't know if that's the case. I would love to hear a little bit from you if that means that just like you look at yourselves as your own audience, or how does the audience figure into your thinking about this stuff?
Thanks, Julio. Yeah, you're actually right. I was nervous about this question a little bit because that is very much true. Whenever we think of a project, it's really something that we want for ourselves or imagine in our own world. It's not something that we're necessarily we're not really thinking about and identifying an external audience at that point at all. But this very much ties in with the way we tell our stories too, because like when we, for example, design a pen or like a blade that we think is different and delightful in some way, we'll kind of like walk you through all the steps and like our entire thought process in a very real and human way to kind of just like say like, we didn't like this about blades and we didn't like that about blades and here's how we solved that. And it kind of like, I think those things in a way like draw in your audience because you're correlating these things that everybody can kind of relate to and like building your story from there. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think, yeah, and I do suggest everyone later go and actually look at the projects. I think go look at the Biolite projects, go look at CW&T projects. I think you'll understand a lot of what Erica and Taylor have just said when you actually see their videos. You're gonna see these threads that they're talking about. Oscar, I wanted to actually ask you a little bit of a different question, like rather than like moving on from audience, but talking about like the arc of product stories that you tell on Kickstarter. You have a lot of experience not only telling stories of your own products, but telling stories of other creators, of products developed by other creators. So like what, I mean, when you're thinking about the story arc of a product on Kickstarter, like how do you, like what are the kind of key topics that you feel like always need to be there to convince people, yeah, like what are the key story elements that you find are kind of essential for any Kickstarter story?
Yeah, thanks, Julio. It's funny because I'm doing some of my own, I'm launching my own products on Kickstarter, and I'm also doing campaigns for other people. And actually the story, the way I'm telling the stories is very, very different if it's for a client, for someone launching a Kickstarter, or if it's for my own product. And it kind of fits in, what Erica is doing with her team and what Taylor is doing with her as well. Because with my product, I'm very much more talking to people, my friends and other designers when I tell the story. And when I work with clients for like more serious, like big, larger campaigns and so on, It's really looking at, okay, what is the audience, who is the audience, and so on. And in terms of, but there's always, I think the starting point we're always doing for every campaign we're doing, whether it's my campaigns or Sidekick campaigns, and we show that in the video and in the image and in the story. It's the first thing we always ask is, what is your unique selling point? So what is the main thing about your product? And there's always one thing. For instance, Erica, on the headlamp, it's the fact that you got the battery at the back, and therefore the weight is kind of nicely balanced, and it's not an annoying headlamp. For the moon that we launched, which is behind me, I think to make it simple, we said it's an accurate moon. It's like the real moon. For the tape that I launched, the tape with the stickers, it's tape and stickers at the same time. So we're always trying to find what is the main thing, and then that would be the first thing we would show on the video, for instance, and the first thing we would feature on the page. Really say, if someone would ask us like, okay, what is the product, then you need to see this in the first sentence. And then, I mean, we are always quite keen to have a sort of a documentary style approach on our videos, for instance, because to tell the story, because we feel it works well with Kickstarter, and it's, talking about the design process behind the work, and speaking about the team and where it's going to be produced. I think it's just way better way to convey a story and to get people to jump in and back the project. So in terms of the arc of the stories and the things that needs to be said is obviously, I think, focusing on what it is always what is the main thing. And it's not easy to identify, because sometimes, for instance, if you would be making something, if you're making a glass, just a single glass, you need to find what's special about it. And that's can be quite tricky to find, because especially if it's your own product, because you can't step back and be objective about it. But identifying what is the unique selling point, then doing some backstory of like the design process, manufacturing, and also there's always context. You have to show the product in action in a real context. I think that's quite important.
Awesome. And Taylor, I would love to hear from you. Similar question. I think you guys have I think a pretty standardized approach. I'm not standardizing it but like you guys have figured out a model for your Kickstarter campaigns. And I think I've seen some more tweaks of that model more recently in your more recent campaigns. But I'd love to hear a little bit about, how do you, now that you guys have so many of these under your belt, like how do you guys approach building out that outline for your story?
Yeah, I think the point that Oscar was making before, that coming up with that one-liner, that like one or maybe two sentence pitch to really like that encompasses not only your thing and not only describes it, but really draws people in and like makes them want to ask and like say like, what is this thing, and invites them really to engage in your story is incredibly important. And that's actually something that Sewe and I find, I'd say, like the most challenging. And we're kind of like, it kind of only comes to us, I'd say, for the most part, while we're building our page and while we're kind of writing the copy and taking photographs for our page. It's sort of like within that, and within writing and rewriting and taking photos and like finding the story through the photos that you're taking, that you can kind of like tease out and say like that's what it is. Like those two sentences or that one sentence is really the thing that is compelling to us. And then another thing that I wanted to add is like, Sewe and I, we used to do this more at the beginning, and I think we still do it now, but we definitely do it now. There comes to a point in our project, and I think it happens like extremely early on, like maybe just like when we have made like the earliest prototypes and we're not even sure if this thing is going to be a Kickstarter project yet. We always just start a Kickstarter page for the project and just kind of like start writing around it. And we make that like imagining how to tell the story is sort of an integral part of the building of the thing itself. We used to do this a lot more early on, I have to admit, but it is something that I think was like really valuable and important, because it's interesting to have that as a tool to kind of like help your creative process.
Yeah, this is great. I love that you're kind of going into process, because I think that's really important, like the process of how do you start building out your story. Eric, I'd love to hear from you on like, what is, I mean, I think you run a team of people who are, you know, who storytelling is a big part of what you guys do, you know, in a marketing team. I'd love to hear a little bit about your process. Like, how do you guys start crafting a story? Like, what's the key milestones that you guys go through as you are trying to evolve that?
Yeah, totally. So for us, we always start with a wireframe. And interestingly enough, that wireframe does not start in the Kickstarter environment, because we sort of want to be as unencumbered as possible to kind of think about just like, what is it in its messiest form, in its messiest unstructured form. And oftentimes that is literally just a Word document. And so what we do is the kind of the easiest, quickest way to build the story is through quick copywriting. And it could take like bullet format, it could be an outline, it could be just like an explosion of words. But what we do is we get this kind of verbal wireframe together, and then we go through iterations. And I think that this goes back to, Julio, what you were saying in the beginning about you can't do this in 3 weeks. And it's not just that you can't do it in 3 weeks because there's so many things to work on, but I actually think that a good Kickstarter campaign goes through multiple drafts, because you are going to have to kill some darlings. You know, you are going to have to take some stuff out of the main campaign. Maybe it makes it into a future update. Maybe it, you know, is part of your social, maybe whatever. But I think the double-edged sword of the Kickstarter environment is that there's no limit. Like, there's no character count limit on Kickstarter. So it can go as long as you want it to go, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so I think that it's really about getting to the essential story. And so what we do is we create this wireframe, and then what we do is we start adding layers to it. And you know, it's funny, we always talk about storytelling, but telling can be boring. You know, like, what is story showing? Like, how do you not just tell people about the product, but show people what you're talking about, so that it's not just a really dense text essay. And so what we'll do is that wireframe will kind of start to come to life, and certain paragraphs will get replaced with a single photo or GIF, or certain areas will realize, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did a breakout video here? Or where we say, oh, let's do like a triptych of sketches or things like that. And so you start to kind of have this template where what started as 800 words might cut down to 300, and it gets replaced by a lot of other multimedia. So you end up with the same understanding as if you read it, but the experience is much more engaging and much more dynamic.
Awesome. No, that's super helpful. And what just, you did mention again, the timing as well. Like, what is a usual time frame that your team takes from like starting that wireframe to having something ready to launch?
Well, I would say for me, and maybe this is something where Oscar and Taylor, you two can weigh in. I feel like I have an embarrassment of riches because I have a full like product team and a product life cycle that I follow. So like, I get to learn about these products a year and a half before they need to launch. And so I have a lot of runway. But in terms of the actual execution of like, oh, we're opening up the Kickstarter environment and we're starting to play around, I would say that it is a minimum of 90 days. Like, I would say that it, 90 days from start to finish in terms of understanding what are the components that we want, what are the videos we need to go get, what's the photography that we're missing, going back to the product team and saying, hey, I need you to go through all of your sketches and give me, 3 things that you find really compelling or things like that. And so a lot of it is cat herding. But I would say like from start to finish, I would say a minimum of 90 days can really help you develop the story you want. And then sometimes that's even longer depending on the size and scope of the campaign. So yeah, I would say 90 days. I would say 2 months is possible. I would say anything less than 2 months, you're really just gonna stress yourself out.
And Oscar, what
Yeah,
about you? Just
I think it's exactly the same. I mean, I'd say minimum 3 months to really get a good campaign prepared. That's what we usually say to our clients when someone approaches us. And by experience, I think when we work with clients, it's like 3 to 6 months. And I'm always pushing the clients to delay their launch very often. Sometimes, they say, oh, I have to launch in 4 months, and there's no way I'm launching after that because I have that strict deadline. And it turns out that, the deadline is actually not that important. And I'm always like, okay, let's wait another 2 months because we can still do something better on the page and so on. And you need to get your prototype ready because then we delay the video shoot, and the video is going to be a much better one because we have the final prototype and so on. So I think definitely take your time. There's no rush to launch a Kickstarter campaign because I don't think in a lot of products that you can see on Kickstarter, there's not much competition. It's not like it's different than if you launch something in the more traditional market, I think. And I wanted to add something in the length of preparation is that I forgot, but I think take your time. Definitely take your time.
So the one thing that I wanted to pick up that Erica brought up, just how like the page on Kickstarter can be really long, and I think and some products have pages that are really long and that work, and other products. But how do you guys manage? Because it is just the way the interface works. It is a long scroll. Like that's what it is. Like there isn't a way to hyperlinks there. Like so, how do you approach the long scroll to make it readable and to make it so that people can easily interact with that content in that format? Like what are strategies that you use, whether they're design strategies or whether they're actually how do you think about the storytelling differently because it has to live in such a specific format? Taylor, would you mind starting on that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to share some stuff that we do. So I guess there's a few things that are the most important to us when we have a page. I wish I had a page up so I could look at it now. But the main thing I think is the first step in our process is always to take really clean, honest pictures of the actual final thing. And these aren't lifestyle photos. They're not photos with other stuff. They're just the thing on its own, so that maybe on a solid background of some sort, properly lit, that really just show this thing in its most real and honest, true form as possible. So we tend to start our project pages with that. And then we kind of we sort of punctuate the whole thing. This kind of leads into how Erica was talking about building their pages, is we'll have these 2-sentence kind of bullet points that we end up making bold and big to kind of punctuate the really important things that we want to talk about as we proceed down the page. And then those are kind of just interspersed with we need to show it in a hand, we need to show it in use, we need to show it at a scale of a full person. And we kind of just go down and down, and it's sort of you can imagine it as zooming in at the beginning, maybe not zooming all the way in at the beginning, but our process is zooming in, and then once we always end up the day before that we're about to launch, shooting lifestyle in process photos and videos of everything that's really close up and gritty and dirty. And we sort of, Sewe and I always have this conversation, and then I'm like, it's enough, Sewe, we're done with the photos at the bottom. He's like, who cares? It's just photos at the bottom. Put them in there, it doesn't matter. So we kind of tend to use the end of the page as a trash can of if somebody's gotten down there and they just want to see it, it's eye candy, I guess.
Let's call it a goodie bag.
Yeah, a goodie bag at the bottom. But that's not something I recommend necessarily. I think it's maybe one of the weakest parts of our campaign, but we do that. I don't know.
I'm gonna have to counterpoint you. I think you guys do have such beautiful images in your campaigns that I actually love that you guys I'm a fan of some of those kind of extra images that you guys add, just because you guys tend to have just really nicely just beautiful shots.
Yeah, that's another thing too to like save time for also is like lifestyle stuff, because it's just me and Sewe, especially during COVID. So like if you need other people to like give context to your stuff, like that requires a lot more planning than something that's like handheld and small or like can live in a home.
And actually that does get something that I want to touch on is this notion of like, what kind of resources do you need to bring to the table in order to develop like the narrative, like a project page and a project video? I know that this like really differs depending on what kind of project video you're making or what kind of photos you need. But I'd love to hear a little bit. Oscar, do you mind starting us off? Like what kind of resources do you need to bring? And also because since you worked in the, like actually doing work for other creators, I'd love to see how you talk to a creator when they're like talking to you and like, oh, how much am I going to need to spend on this? Or how much am I going to need to, how much time are we going to need to how many people are going to bring on board?
Well, it's all obviously always down to what type of product you're doing, how much you need to raise, and what budget you have for the video, for instance. If you for the moon, for instance, we had to raise I think £25,000, and it was designed by me and two other friends, and we didn't have a big budget, but I had my other company with the gear, so we had all the photo gear, and we rented a studio and so on. For some products and clients, you definitely need a studio, a proper studio. We need to hire 1 or 2 models because they really want to raise quite a lot of money, and they need to have something that looks professional and legit. And they want to have different user scenarios and so on. But also, they also want to have a video sometimes that they can use on their website and where they can make edits later on outside of Kickstarter. So it needs to be of a certain standard and not just, it wouldn't work with a cheap, like DIY video. But what you need if any of you want to do a Kickstarter campaign and want to shoot the video, it's really down to, I think, brainstorm on what you want to do and for your product, and you could go super cheap if the product kind of would work with this sort of art direction. It's down to the art direction. Essentially, for instance, the tape sticker campaign, it's a roll of tape and it's stickers, and they are useful stickers because they give size of paper and so on. So it's a DIY product. It's meant to live in a workshop, and therefore I thought, okay, it'd be great to just do a really cheap video, hardly, like with natural light, and shot in one day. And I actually shot it with an iPhone 7. So it's, that was like, in terms of production, it was super cheap. I didn't have any models. I didn't have any models. I had one friend helping me to hold the camera when I was filming my hands. But it's difficult to say what you need for a video, because it's really down to what video. But if you're looking at a high quality product where you need to raise quite a few, several $1,000s, then you might want to, get some good equipment. What you need is to have a camera that does 1080 at least in terms of resolution, and at least 1 or 2 people helping you on the video. Don't do the video by yourself. That's a bit too much too much work.
But I do think, to your point, like I think it is really depending on the scale that you're going for. I know that Erica, just seeing, like if you could share just a little bit about the complexity of the video that you created for the headline. Any of your campaigns, the Fire Pit campaign also, where you have all these people, you have these graphics overlaid that show how the product works. So like, can you share a little bit about the work involved in creating something like that?
Yeah, totally. Before I do that, the one thing I will say, just back to the length of a campaign type of thing, is take advantage of the preview link. there's a preview mechanism in Kickstarter where you can share the current state of your campaign. And I would recommend with like trusted people who don't work on the project, share that preview with them, because they'll let you know what they glean from the campaign. And that's, I think, a really important thing is like, you're so close to this product and project that you could fall prey to kind of insider baseball, where you end up creating a narrative that is super intuitive to you, but somebody might say, this is great. How big is it? You know, like they just like you, they don't know the scale. They don't know the, you know, and so anyway, just wanted to go rogue for a second and say,
That's great.
Take advantage of the preview link. In terms of video, so you know, for all of our projects, the most ambitious video we ever did was for the headlamp. The most commercially successful revenue project was the fire pit. And so both of those had totally different scopes. We worked with the same videographer, but for fire pit, we rented a cabin and had a bunch of friends over and we filmed it. And then the next day we went to the beach and filmed it at the beach. And so it was pretty easy, you know. With headlamp, you know, fire pit, actually the scope was easier because you really just needed to film the fire pit working because it's so mesmerizing. You know, you get big, beautiful flames, especially against dusk. It's smokeless. The industrial design's really compelling. And the product itself is kind of large, so it can take up a full frame. With headlamp, like headlamps aren't that interesting. Like headlamps just aren't that interesting. It's what people do with them that are interesting. It's the activities they partake in. It's the adventures they go on. It's the stories they live. It's the things they do after dark that makes it interesting. And so for us, it's also about really understanding the job of the video. And so for us, like, so again, fire pit, you would assume had this like big crazy budget and like, you know, like went gangbusters on it. Look at this big campaign. The budgets for those two campaigns, I think we spent more on headlamp than we did on fire pit, because it had a different job to do. So we shot at 3 different locations. We shot with 3 different ambassadors. And then we also did a follow-up series of mini documentaries. So one of the things we wanted to do was demonstrate that the people in these videos weren't just models, they were actual people and users who were using our headlamp to do interesting things. So we had a runner, we had a rancher, and a thru hiker. And so, yeah, so I think that's also about like how much mileage can you get out of this footage? And I think, Oscar, that's kind of what you are going to as well, is that if you are producing this super high quality video, you can slice and dice that raw footage in a number of ways. You can turn it into your Kickstarter video. You could potentially edit it into a commercial product overview video. If you're working on any sort of like social or pay-per-click acquisition, you can turn it there. So it's like, really look at that ball of clay and think about how many different things you can make out of it.
Yeah. And
oh, sorry, go on, Oscar, go on.
Can I just add something? I mean, also looking at your campaign, Erica, and what we were just discussing, it's quite obvious. What do you need for your video? I mean, the most obvious thing you need is the context of your product. If you're doing a hand lamp, then you need to go in the mountain and to shoot that. If you can't do that, then of course you could do it in the studio where, you know, it's just like with on a plain background. But what it requires you is to be a lot more creative, because you could be doing a super boring video, but if you want to turn that into really to convince people to buy a headlamp just on a neutral background, then you have to be super creative, and it could also cost more at the end, because you need to be like hire a super good team for that.
Yeah, and I, you know, the what you guys are saying, which I think is really an important thing that creators often don't think, is about like how the investment you make in your campaign doesn't necessarily only reap value during the campaign. Like hopefully you are creating assets that you can, whether video, images, copy, that you can leverage later on your own website. You know, I know Taylor, I mean, I do want to, this is the last question, and then I'm going to open it up for questions for other people. But, you know, Taylor, would you mind just, I think, one, sharing the comment that you just, that you shared, I think, with the panelists around your use of previews and with your mailing list. And then the other thing I wanted to, I'd love to hear about how you guys use the media that you create for Kickstarter on your own website for when you were making sales after the Kickstarter is over.
Yeah, I guess Erica also brought to my attention when she was talking that yeah, we do actually, like, it's kind of become, now that I think about it, like a ritual for us that we kind of blast our mailing list the night before the campaign, when like Sayo and I are kind of like up super late till like 4 a.m. doing final tweaks, and it gives us this like nice injected energy, but also like a kind of panic sometimes. Maybe we do it like 24 hours before it launches. And we just, like, a lot of our followers like leave really valuable comments and like make us see this thing in a totally new way. And I guess like we did have the hesitation at the beginning, like, why should we do this? There's obviously like some iffy, like, I don't know, it's just like, why are we sending this now? Like, if they can't get it now, are they going to click on it after and get it later? But I think it really does help, and it makes them feel more like intrinsically involved with everything that we do. And it's like this beautiful little lens. And it's actually like really helpful to us and valuable, but sometimes it like throws a wrench into something and we're like, oh no, like Julio told us that like this thing doesn't make any sense. We have to reshoot a bunch of new things now, which does happen. But fortunately, we can do that normally pretty quickly. And if we can't, we just don't launch. We'll wait another week.
Awesome. I was gonna, actually, I look at the time. I do want to give a little bit of time for Q&A. So let's switch to Q&A. We won't get into some of the e-commerce, like relationship between Kickstarter campaign and e-commerce that I wanted to get to. But let's see what questions we're getting in the Q&A. And if we're not getting questions quick enough, then I'll throw some of those in here now. But so I would just ask everyone. Don Co just asked, as storytelling experts who have launched successful projects across the years and have built an audience, do you ever consider that it becomes more worthwhile to do your own pre-orders, pre-order sales on your own website versus running a Kickstarter campaign? So is that something that any of you have considered, or have you any of you ever done it?
I've never done it, but I think it's something you could definitely do. But what you need to consider is that if you would go on a random website to, pre-order something, there's always this sort of trust that you need to get from that platform, that website. And Kickstarter now is big enough, and it's super famous, and it has this it's been there for like 12 years or something, 11 years. People trust Kickstarter as a platform. They know it's secured, and they know they will get the reward. And if they don't, they can complain, and they start a process of complaint. But I think what important is sometimes some clients tell us that they want to do a campaign and they want to do the pre-orders on their website only. I advise them not to do it, because I think they don't have that, especially if it's a startup and they don't really exist. It's going to be very difficult to pull lots of people to pre-order on your website versus the Kickstarter.
Great. Erica and Taylor, have you guys ever consider that?
Yeah, so we've done both, and I think that it's dependent on what our market opportunity is. Like, I'm sorry, it's not like a sexy answer, but like, for example, we just launched another headlamp, and we could have done it on Kickstarter, but we didn't, because we already had a retailer who was really interested in a first to market opportunity. And so that was going to give us the exposure and the velocity and the volume that was going to really help bring it to life. Would I have liked to do it on Kickstarter? Definitely. It would have been awesome to tell this story on Kickstarter. But at the same time, for us, one of the there's lots of different reasons that Kickstarter is valuable. For me in particular is it allows Biolite to take chances on products that retail buyers are too afraid to make the first move on. So like when we when we came up with a headlamp, people were like, our buyers in our traditional channels were like, we have like 6 headlamp brands, like, why do we need to buy another one? And so Kickstarter is a really transparent window into demand and interest. and that's a big difference between your pre-order and Kickstarter, is that when you do pre-orders on your website, the only people who see the pre-orders are you and your back-end, operations team. But on Kickstarter, you're super transparent about how many people are coming in and demanding this product. And so like that can cut both ways, because if it goes well, amazing. If it doesn't go well, that's for another day. But I think that there is something really powerful about enthusiasm breeding enthusiasm inside of the Kickstarter environment. That being said, it's not Field of Dreams. Like, it's not if you build it, they will come. Like, there is still a lot of other work below the surface about building base, building your press, building, social proof and all of that. But I do think Kickstarter is it's what they say. Like, it's a really powerful platform to help bring an idea to life. And I think that it generates a lot of excitement that a traditional e-commerce environment doesn't hold a lot of space for.
Cool. And so just, do you guys mind? I'm just going to give one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap up. There's a question here. What do you say to prospective customers that think your product is priced too high? And I think we can even just more general, like, I think some of you who do premium products, like, how do you make the case, like, show that your product is a premium product? Like, how do you, I think Taylor, I'd love to have you, just because I think you guys do products that are like beautifully crafted and are pretty premium, I think in their
yeah. I think like the first thing is to really just be as honest as possible, and like transparent about the process that is going to be required to make whatever it is that you're making. Because like, if you do have to price something high, like we make really expensive stuff. It's like, but it actually costs that much money to make those things. And we don't even like upcharge that much, like we don't price it as like a thing that would probably like if you asked Erica, she'd probably have a different answer for you, because you guys sell to stores too, like you wholesale. And like, that's not really part of our business. So like the things that we make are actually like, they cost a lot of money to make. And so we make that part of our story, so that people, like, there are people who are like, what, you're selling a pen for like $160? That's insane. Like, people say that, but that's okay. Like, that, it's just not for you right now. And like, that's okay. If nobody was buying it, then it would be a problem. But I think as long as you're honest about like what the real costs are, so people can kind of like understand what it takes to make a thing properly, then I don't think there's a problem charging what it costs. Like, don't charge less than it costs, because then you're screwed in the end.
Okay, great. I think we have time for just one last quick one. This is one, I know that there's a bunch of other questions here, and I think what we can do is try to, answer these later in an email that will follow up with everybody who joined today. But does it make sense to start with a small project or go with something big? Oscar, I'd love for you to answer this, because I think you had like worked across different scales of projects. I know Taylor, you have too, but I'd love.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes 100% sense to start with a small project. I think the small projects are the fun, the best ones. First of all, you don't have any pressure if it fails, as long as you've done the calculations of all the costs correctly, even if it's a small project. But it's just, you're not going to have any pressure to launch that campaign, and if it's successful, it's great, and so on. But it's I've done loads of very small project campaigns under the name Quickstarter, which is something I created a few years ago. I think I'm talking about it in the masterclass. And yeah, I make very small campaigns which last something like 20 days, and I need to ask something under less than $1,000. And for me, it's just a great playground of like, when I have an idea, I just try to put it on Kickstarter and see how it goes. And I'm planning to launch a lot more of those when I have time. The problem is always to have time. But because I think I want to launch a small project and see how it takes off, and maybe launch it again like a year later as a big project, saying, okay, I've seen people being enthusiastic about that, and now I want to turn it into a real, like, big scale product. So yes, start with a small project.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna wrap it up now with our panelists. Again, thank you all for submitting those questions. We will take a look at them and follow up later with more answers to those. So again, Oscar, Erica, and Taylor, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really awesome to have you here and sharing all of your insights and yeah, just experience. What I would say is everyone else, if you're interested in finding out learning more about Launch Studio, hang out. Those of you who you know, we're just here for the panel and for the conversation, thank you all for joining as well. So I'm just going to give a few minutes for people to sort themselves out.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.